Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, this Bible lecture, is to learn and to analyze the conquest of Joshua. We all know, we spoke about it for so long, that there's nothing as a coincidence in the Bible. There's no such thing. There's always something behind that, something deeper that we need to dig in and find it out. And once we find it out, we can understand the stories of the Bible a lot better than just flipping through the pages. The more we learn about the Bible, the deeper we understand how it is. It is, I think, the deepest book ever. That's my own personal opinion. I read chapters every single night, and every time I read it, I find new meanings. So, what we're going to do, there's going to be two parts of this lecture. It's not going to be a long one. The first part will be about Joshua, son of Nun, Yeshua ben Nun, son of Nun, and also about the different way of warfare that he used in order to take the land in such a swift action. So that will be the first part. Second part, we are going to use Google Earth for us to show the way of the battle, of one of the battles of Joshua, what is the outcome and why the battle took place up in that specific location. Okay, so without further ado, what I will do now, I'm going to do a share screen. I made for you guys a quick presentation. Just let me know if you see it. All right, everybody see that? Joshua, son of Nun? Thumbs up? All right, perfect. So let's start to understand who was Joshua, son of Nun, and what is even the meaning of the name Joshua, son of Nun, which we will say in Hebrew, Yehoshua ben Nun. Okay, Yehoshua ben Nun. Unlike Jesus, which is Yeshua, Joshua is Yehoshua. Okay, so let's look at this. Yeshua, son of Nun, one of the greatest commanders, greatest warriors in history. We need to start with a name. When we read in the book of Numbers 13, verse 16, we hear that his name is not Yehoshua. His name is not Joshua. His name is Hoshea or Hosea. Now we know a guy by the name Hosea. There is a prophet Hosea. So how this happened, how from Hosea he became Yehoshua? It's because of the adding of the Yud, the Ye, at the beginning. In Hebrew, if you have a Ye in the beginning, it means by God. The name Yehoshua was given to Hoshea by Moses. The meaning of the word Hoshea is salvation, okay, or salvage, Hoshea. However, Yehoshua is God will salvage, okay? This is a very, very important understanding, because if his name was just Hoshea, then people would have said the person was the one that delivered Israel. He is the one, Joshua was the person that brought Israel into the land of Canaan. He himself was the great commander that the Israelites, because of him, succeeded in their campaign. But in his infinite wisdom, Moses adds the Yud and makes his name from Hoshea to Yehoshua, which means God is the one that gave the salvation. This is a very important understanding for us, because that will resonate later when he will distribute the land among the different tribes. Okay, so the name Yehoshua. We also know who he was, where his family is from. How do we know this? Because of his last name. In the Bible, there's no last names. It's not like today, Martin Nishi or Bill Wicks or Omer Eshel. Last names were not, there was no last names. The names were the profession. Look at this. His name is son of Nun, right? Nun in Aramaic is a fish. So in English, it will be Joshua, the son of the fish, which you're going to say, I don't understand. Why the son of the fish? Well, Joshua, as we know, was born in Egypt. Egypt, one of the great sources of food production in Egypt is fishermen, either from the Mediterranean or from the great river Nile. And we actually have that in the Bible when the children of Israel are crying that they miss the fish and the meat in Egypt. So we know that Joshua was a son of a fisherman. How do we know this? Hoshea, son of the fisherman. Hoshea, son of Nun. Okay, so we understand that this guy comes from a not high blood. He's not nobility, doesn't belong to the priesthood, nothing of that sort. He is a how should I explain that? He is not the lowest class, but he is from the lower class of the people. Okay, a very, very humble man. It's interesting. There's a very interesting connotation between Jesus and Joshua. The names are similar, the background is similar, the fact of the deliverance is similar at the end of the day. And I always like to show that the greatest leaders of Israel, the biggest ones, always came from basically nothing, which goes very well to blessed are the meek, but this is for a completely different completely different presentation. So we have here after the children of Israel exit from Egypt into the wilderness. Moses at the time of the Exodus was 80 years old. He needed someone to be on his right hand side, and that someone will not be Aaron. How do we know that? We have several occasions in scriptures that Aaron is a little bit disobedient to Moses. Also, Miriam is a little bit disobedient to Moses. Actually, if you remember the story after the disobedience of Miriam and Aaron, Miriam puts her hand into her blouse, and when she took the hands out, it was white as snow because of leprosy. So we have Moses needed a person that he can count on, and this will be Yoshua. One of the greatest showdowns of Joshua was actually in the Battle of Rephidim. That's the very famous battle that Joshua actually led. The Israelites fought against the Amalekites, and then you had Aaron on one side and Hur on the other side, raising the hands of Moses while Joshua is leading the campaign. And the victory was immense. If you remember that story, when Moses lowered his hand, the Israelites lost. When Moses left his hands, the Israel won. So this was one of his greatest moments of Joshua as a second in command, not the commander. He was one of the two spies. Out of the 12, there were two spies that actually came back and gave good news about the land. It was Joshua and Caleb. Joshua, we know, was the military leader, which after him, the land was distributed by the tribes. The first judge in the Bible, his name is Othniel, son of Kenaz. Othniel, son of Kenaz, from the land of Ephraim, from the tribe of Ephraim. This Othniel is the cousin of Caleb. So we can see how this chain of commands is shifting all the way from Moses to Joshua to Caleb to Othniel, and then we have that shift between the two periods of time from Joshua into Judges. Okay. God appointed Joshua to succeed Moses. We know this because God gave a blessing to Joshua. There's almost no blessing like that in scriptures, that God basically says to someone, you will be invincible. I'm going to rephrase that. It's not that Joshua as a person is invincible. That doesn't make sense. Is the fact that God gave him a purpose, and that purpose was to defeat the armies of the Canaanites who dwelled in the land of Canaan. Now, because of that, the fear, because we have to remember, we're talking about a bunch of slaves that were wandering around in the desert for 50 years. What exactly do they know about any kind of warfare? That goes back again to the changing of the name, Yehoshua. God will salvage. And that goes very well to what we read in Joshua 1:5. He actually he didn't perform, he touched the Jordan River and split it in half, very much the same as Moses did. And I think that God, in his infinite wisdom, made that small miracle. We all speak about the departing of the Red Sea. No one speaks about the departing of the Jordan River, but that's a big miracle. You cut a river in half. I think that God, in His infinite wisdom, showed the Israelites by doing this. He said, "I made a great miracle with the former leader, with Moses. Now I'm doing it the same with this leader." And I think this is one of the main reasons why the Israelites followed him without any objections. If you remember the story of Korach, Joshua did not have that. And he led the Israelites into the land of Canaan through a series of battles that at the end of that series, we are seeing 31 nations being defeated by Joshua. When we look at one of the main conquests, so the first story, of course, is the story of Jericho. After Joshua crosses the Jordan River, the first city that he encounters is the city of Jericho, followed by the Ai. After the Ai, he goes up to the mountains where he finds the alliance of the five south kings. Okay, the king of Jerusalem or Ur Shalom, the king of Hebron, the king of Yarmouth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. We're going to speak about this in a second. What happened is he basically fights against two main coalitions, the South Coalition and the North Coalition. When Joshua enters into the land, he enters in might and fire. We need to remember the story of Jericho being destroyed is not small potatoes. We are talking about a great miracle that the city crumbles before God. Everybody knows about this. How do we see this? The next thing that we hear about after the destruction of Jericho is that the Gibeonites are running to Joshua and ask him to be his protege because they heard about the might of the of the God of Israel. So we've first seen an alliance between the Hivites, which is the Gibeonites, and the Israelites. This alliance will last for about 600 years. It will end around the time of King David, but this will last for about 600 years. We see a rising power that comes from the desert and basically destroys fortified cities. Some of them are mini empires. We need to remember that back then, at that time, the cities of Hebron, Yarmouth, Lachish, and Jerusalem were actually not that big. They were not big cities. The big city were up in the north. The kingdom of Hatzor was the largest kingdom of all. I'm not taking any kind of disrespect from the other cities that were well fortified and all of that, but they were not empires. So after Joshua comes up and defeats the five kings, he basically kills them in a cave in the city of Makeda. I sent in the newsletter, I sent a quick movie about this. And then he destroyed the city of Livna, Dvir, and Kadesh Barnea. Kadesh Barnea is all the way down in the south of Israel. Altogether, 31 cities and kings. Why the Bible is saying 31 cities and kings? We need to understand and we need to remember. The Bible speaks about the different cities like a state polis, okay? It was not a kingdom. It's not Babylonia. It's not Assyria. It's not Aram. Each city was kind of like a Greek polis, okay? So for example, the king of Hatzor, well, Hatzor is not a good example because Hatzor was a kingdom, but let's say the king of Ur Shalom, Jerusalem, was a king of one city. The king of Gezer, one city. Yes, there were different alliances between those little nations, but all those small nations that we hear about, the Hittites, the Jebusites, Hittites, they were all small nations that controlled very few cities. Sometimes they had coalitions, as we see right now, both in the stories of Hatzor and the story of Jerusalem, but they were not nations. It was not the nation of Israel versus the nation of Jericho. It was the nation of Israel versus the city of Jericho. Where do we see a difference? We see that up in the north, Hatzor, and we see it on the coastline, which are the Philistines. The Philistines also were built not as a nation. they were built as police states. The captain of Gaza, the captain of Gath, the captain of Ekron, and so on and so forth. But they were similar in their ethnicity, because the Philistines arrived to the land of Israel, give or take about 50 years before Joshua. The Philistine invasion into the land of Canaan takes place at the beginning of the 13th century BCE, where we have the children of Israel in the mid of the 13th century BCE, before Common Era. So this is one of the main reasons why Joshua doesn't confront the Philistines so much. We're going to analyze his movements in a second, but he doesn't confront the Philistines, because the Philistines, as I said before, they are different cities, but they are one nation. Other nations like that will be the Phoenicians, Tyre and Sidon, for example. They're also Phoenician cities. Egyptians, of course, the Egyptian Empire. And then going up to the north will be the Hittite Empire, later on to become Aram, and of course, Assyria, Babylonia, but this is a little bit later. Okay, so we need to understand that Joshua destroys 31 cities, which are states in the language of the Bible. Each city is a state. I chose to show you two great epic moments in the conquest, and to speak about Jericho and about Hatzor. There were two shockwaves that was done by Joshua. Two shockwaves. We hear a lot about the coalition in Jerusalem and the great battle against the five kings and the destruction of the south of the land, but it is nothing compared to Hatzor. Okay, when Joshua enters into the land, he destroys the city of Jericho by a miracle. He didn't even fire one arrow at that city. He just circled it, blew the trumpets, and God brought all the walls down. This is I would say, you enter with a bang. Everybody heard about what happened. Then you have the coalition, the South coalition, which was completely devastated and destroyed by Joshua. And later on, he goes up through Israel to the north to face the greatest kingdom. What Joshua is doing, maybe we can see it on the next slide. What Joshua is doing is basically taking advantage of a political situation that, from some reason, the Bible doesn't describe it, but this is where history and archaeology helps us to understand the void that Joshua, in his extreme genius military thought, took to his advantage. Let's go a little bit before Joshua. We're going back to the 14th century BCE. The children of Israel are in Egypt. Actually, they're doing pretty good. It's before Ramesses. They are actually enjoying. This is before what the Bible describes, that there was a new Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. So the 14th century BCE, the Jews are, or they're called Hebrews, by the way, back then. They're not called Jews yet. Jews is from the land of Judea. Their name was Hebrews. So the Hebrews are doing pretty well. We need to try to imagine that we have an empire, which is the Egyptian Empire in the south, and we have the Hittite Empire, which originated from Turkey up in the north. Okay. By the way, we will hear a lot about the Hittites way after Joshua. For example, Uriah was a Hittite. Okay, so the Hittites came from Turkey. There is a big clash between those two empires, and the main scene of battles is the land of Israel. So you have the northern kingdoms are given their allegiance to the Hittite Empire, and the southern regions give their allegiance to Egypt. In the late 19th century, in a place called El Amarna in Egypt, we found a treasure. This is the picture of the El Amarna tablets. It's a treasure that is written in ancient handwriting from cities, from captains of cities to their king. This one right here is tablet number 286 and 287. Okay, and this is from a king by the name Abdi Chepa, king of Ursalum. Ursalum is Jerusalem. This is the city of Jerusalem. We're talking 14th century BC, about 100 years before Joshua enters into the land and fights against Ursalum. Okay, Let's read what he says here. Abdi Chefa writes this to Pharaoh to Pharaoh Manafach in Egypt. Okay, and he writes this. Abdi Chefa, king of Jerusalem, he writes this. Now, O king, my lord, there is no garrison, and so may the king provide for his land. May the king provide for his land. All the lands of the king, my lord, have deserted. After this great arm wrestling between Egypt and the Hittite empires, what happened was that the land itself was exhausted. The people in the land were exhausted of invasion and reinvasion, and one time they belonged to the Egyptian, the other time they belonged to the Hittites. But make no mistakes, every time that a city is changing hands, we're talking the entire possession of the citizens of that city goes to the conquering army. So basically, the land was broke. There was nothing there. Then we have an entry of nomads. Those nomads will be the Amalekites, will be the Edomites, will be, again, all these ites, and of course the Philistines. They came into the land, the nomads came into the land and start looting the cities. The cities have no power, because if you are a city that belongs to Egypt, the Egyptian king will not allow you to hold any garrison, because they are afraid that you're going to fight against them. Same thing goes to the north. If you are a king, let's say Hatzor, if you're the king of Hatzor and you have an army, the Hittite Empire will not allow this. So basically, we have completely weakened cities in the land of Canaan. When we visit Israel, we see those great, huge batteries around the cities from the time, a little bit before the time of Joshua. It's hard for us to understand the might of what those cities had before that 14th century BCE. Those cities were massive cities. We see this in Azekah, we see this in Ashkelon, we see this in Dan. Those are big, Lachish, of course. These are huge cities. But those cities were conquered and reconquered again and again and again and again. And what Joshua is doing, he is seizing the moment. He enters into the land of Israel to a very weak nation and very divided nation, and start with Jericho. And he takes that with a bang. This is fireworks. He walks in a triumph procession, and those depleted cities are basically falling down one after the other. In the midst of that movement of Joshua, now we can understand the alliances. Imagine if you are a king, let's say Abdi Chefa, this guy, the king of Jerusalem. You sit down in your throne in Jerusalem and you say, okay, this guy named Joshua is invading. Egypt is not going to come to my aid. This is my time to shine. I will be independent. So I will make an alliance with all the little cities around me, and let's see who wins. If my alliance will win, I will be the guy who controls the land, not the Egyptians. That explained the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites understood what's going to happen, and they said, we understand that probably Joshua is going to take those little alliances of the kings of the south, so they asked to be sided with Joshua. Joshua understood that, and he said, sure, of course, not a problem. Then we see two coalitions. Imagine, there's no great empires here yet, okay? When Joshua defeats the South coalition, he's not fighting against an empire. He's fighting against little chiefdoms that came together, okay? If we look at the journeys of Joshua, look how smart it is. Joshua is brilliant. He enters from Jericho. This is the road that the Israelites did. He enters from Jericho to Gibeon. This is Gibeon right here. Here is the battle next to Jerusalem. Here's the battle of the 5 kings. And then he goes down to his south campaign. South campaign will be in Makkedah, Lachish, Hebron, of course, Dvir, all this area. This is where he takes them one after the other. Okay. Then he comes back and starts walking along the plains of the Sharon, right here, to face the second great threat, which will be the city of Hatzor. So if we look at the stages, stage 1, he enters into the land, Jericho, the big triumph, the big attack, city is falling down, Everybody's trembling. Then the south kings, right here, this is the south coalition, try to seize the moment, get rid of the Egyptians and get rid of the Israelites at the same time, form a coalition, get defeated, okay? And now he's going up to the third and final stage to take the northern coalition. I want to stop here for a second. We spoke about the small little chiefdoms of Jerusalem, of Yarmouth, Hebron, all of that. We have three main players that we didn't speak about. Player number one will be the Hittite Empire, which will be up here in the north. The Hittites and the land of Geshur. Geshur is the Golan Heights, and Geshur was actually the grandfather of Absalom, was the king of Geshur. The name of the city was Abel Beit Makkah. If you remember the story with Sheva son of Bichri, when they chopped his head, he was a traitor against David. He was a follower of King Saul. We are talking 3 books down the line. Let's not talk about that. But we have the Hittites right over here. We have the kingdom of Geshur, and we have the Philistines. Look at this. There's nothing with Joshua and the Philistines. Look at that. We have the Philistines, and of course, we have the Egyptians. Now we can start to put the puzzle together. The children of Israel moved from Egypt, which will be here, to Israel for 40 years in the desert. They could have walked straight through the Philistine land and then enter into the land, but they were too weak. They couldn't do it. That is why it takes them 40 years to wander in the desert to become a nation of warriors, to be led by Moses and by Joshua. They were forged by Joshua to become warriors, and then they enter from the east. Okay? The 3 main powers, the Egyptians are overwhelmed. They just lost half of their military in the Red Sea. The Philistines are waiting to see what happens. The biggest enemies of the Israelites in the future will be the Philistines. Why? Because Joshua conquered all the small little nations, but the Philistines were the one that remained. Another thing, the largest kingdom of all was the kingdom of Hatzor, which will be up here in the north. They were a vassal kingdom of the remaining of the Hittite Empire. This is an empire. This is the head of all kingdoms. Hatzor is the head of all kingdoms. Imagine if Joshua would have continued and destroyed the land of the Philistines, the sworn enemy of the Israelites in the future would have been the Canaanites in Hatzor. The reason why the Philistines are the sworn enemies of the Israelites up until basically King Amaziah is because Joshua did not confront the Philistines. He said, literally, this is a hill I'm not going to die on. All right? So if we look at the stages, stage number 1, stage number 2, and now he's going up to destroy the northern kingdoms. Let's look. Sorry. Okay. If we read book of Joshua 11, then Yavin, king of Hatzor, heard all of this. What is all of this? He heard the movement of Joshua, how Joshua is moving towards the land and conquering place by place. Of course, we know that Yavin knew what happened to the southern coalition. He knew that. But then again, let's not forget, Yavin, king of Hatzor, belongs to the Hittite Empire. So for him, it's a good thing, because the Egyptians just lost their grip. Their allies are slain by Joshua. He will be the one that will conquer not just Joshua, the entire land. All right? We start to understand the politics here. It's not just the stories of Joshua. There's a lot more to it. So Yavin, king of Hatzor, forms a huge alliance. The Bible actually described this. Look at this. He sent word to Chobab, king of Madon, and to the kings of Shimron. Shimron is all the way down in the Jezreel Valley. Okay, to the northern king in the mountains, which is the mountains of Naphtali, south of Kinneret, Dor, and all the way to the Dor in the west, and then to the Canaanites in the east, to the Amorites, to the Hittites, to the Perizzites, to the Jebusites, to the hill countries, and to the Hivites below Hermon, and to the region of Mitzpah. Folks, we are talking about the entire northern part of the land of Israel. That is a big piece of land. If this guy, Yavin, was able to form such a big coalition, that means troubles to Joshua. This is not small chieftains. This is not little Jerusalem, little Hebron, little Makkedah. These are the big dogs, all right? And then they gathered together to the waters of Merom to fight against Israel. Waters of Merom is actually what we know today as Hula Valley. Hula Valley was a natural swamp. Actually, it was a filter. It was a lake that filtered the water of the Sea of Galilee before they flew down to the Jordan River before they flow down to the Sea of Galilee. The main purpose or the main usage of that lake was from the water that's flowing down from the Jordan to be harvested into a very, very large land, a very large and shallow lake. All the debris will and the silt will sink, and then the clean water will continue to the Sea of Galilee. Actually, that lake was in existence until the late 50s, 1950s AD. State of Israel drained that lake in one of the biggest mistakes that we did, and now, thank God, we are reflooding it because we made quite a mess with the quality of the water of Lake Kinneret of the Sea of Galilee. Hey, but we're trying to fix it. So they gathered on this huge plateau ready to go to battle. Now we need to remember, Joshua has no chariots, barely any horses. Whatever he had is basically what he looted from those defeated kings. Okay, facing against him is a major empire. So this is the first time that Joshua is actually fighting against an empire. We will speak about this battle in a second. I want to show you the list in the book of Joshua 12:7. These are the list of the 31 cities or nations that Joshua defeated. They're actually written in the chronological order. If someone wants to understand how Joshua moved, all you need to do is open Joshua 12:7, open a map, and you'll see the exact military campaign of Joshua. How smart this is. It's not just a random, random names of cities bunched in all together. Okay, these are all the cities that Joshua defeated. No, this is the entire military plan. This is the campaign. So what I did, I coded it in colors. This is the southern campaign. These are all the cities that belong to the south campaign, from Jericho via the eye all the way to Makkedah. Then he makes his way up here next to the Philistines. He doesn't touch the Philistines. He goes all the way up here, and then he takes from Bethel, he takes Tapuach, which is in Samaria, Hefer, which is in the northern Sharon, Afek, Sharon, and Madon. We know about Madon. Madon was is the border city of the empire of the north. Then the north here, this is the biggest coalition. Oops. City of Hatzor, Shimron, Merom, Askepa, Ta'anach, Megiddo, Kedesh, and Yokneam, and Dor. So we're talking all of this, the entire northern section of Israel. This is big. This is big with a lot of very strong cities. It's interesting to see how the number of the cities in the South campaign are bigger. There are more cities, but the military might was nothing. How do we know this? Again, when we look at the letters of Elamarna, we just spoke about it, those cities begged for a garrison that the Egyptians will send to them. We hear nothing like that from the north. Okay. One of the interesting discoveries that were made in 2013 in the city of Hatzor was a sphinx bearing the name Pharaoh Manaftach in Hatzor. So one will come and say, how can we see an Egyptian symbol in a northern city that belongs to an Egyptian king? Why is that? This is because it's a diplomatic gift. What happened was, after the main battles, the main clashes between the Hittites and the Egyptians start to mellow down, there were, of course, exchange of diplomatic delegations. One of them probably came to Hatzor bearing the name of an Egyptian king that the Israelites knew very, very, very well. When Joshua enters into Hatzor and burn it to the ground, and that's the only city that he burned to the ground. Why? Because God told him to do that. When he burns down Hatzor to the ground, they take that sphinx and they smash it to little pieces. 3,000 years later, 2013 AD, we find that sphinx, and we can see that someone deliberately sat down with a chisel to break it. That makes a lot of sense that these are the Israelites, because that sphinx is a symbol of their in slavery when they were in Egypt. Okay, so that's again how archaeology shows us that the Bible is correct. When you're going to visit Hatzor today, you will see a thick layer of ash at the palace of Yavin. You can see the palace of Yavin. That ash is dated to the time of Joshua, which is exactly as the Bible describes. When we read Joshua 11, chapter 21, I want to talk about what we just spoke about the Philistine. This is a very big hint of what is about to happen. Okay, let's read this. At the time of Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites. This is a mistranslation in the English Bible. In Hebrew is Anakim, which means giants. It's not just the name of a nation. These are the giants from the hill country. He destroyed the giants from the hill countries, from Hebron, Dvir, Anab, from the hills of the country of Judea, and from the hills of the country of Israel. Joshua totally destroyed them and their towns. No Anakites were left in the Israelite territories. Only in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod did any survive. This is the foundation of the battle of David and Goliath. Right here. The Anakites, the giants that stayed in Gath. All right? It's amazing. We are here talking about, this is 400 years before the battle of David and Goliath. This is the foundation. In Joshua 11, chapter verses 21 to 23, we see the setup for the battle of David and Goliath. Why? Because Joshua was able to destroy the giants. He was not the only one, by the way. Moses fought against Og, who was a giant also. But he left the Anakites, the giants, in the Philistine land because he didn't touch them. That is why the Philistine gave so much trouble to the Israelites all the way till King David and actually much later on. At the end, we see this. So Joshua took the entire land, just as the Lord had directed Moses, and he gave it as an inheritance to Israel according to their tribal division. Then the land had rest from war. A split of a second after that, we have the book of Judges, that the land definitely doesn't rest from war. Okay, so we have here, after this genius conquest of Joshua, we have the layout of the foundation of the children of Israel to establish their kingdom, but they couldn't establish the kingdom up until King Saul for about 400 years. What I want to show you now, I would like to go into Google Earth and try to analyze what happened during that great battle of Joshua against Hatzor. So let's zoom in. This is Hatzor, okay? All right. This entire valley right over here, this is Mei Marum, okay? Hula Valley. This is Hula Valley. Hatzor itself was the largest city, is actually the largest biblical mountain in Israel. When you zoom in, all of this is Hatzor. It's a big city, very big. It's actually about 10 times the size of biblical Jerusalem. That's Hatzor. So I want to show you from above how it looked like, and then we're going to zoom in and see what Joshua saw. When Joshua finishes his south campaign, right over here, he makes his way via Afek and via the Sharon, we just read it, all the way to Lake Kinneret, where he faces the big coalition of the north, right over here. Now, what Joshua did, via Jezreel Valley, he walked through the Jordan River, right over here. Jordan River up to Sea of Galilee, then he entered into the battle. Why? This area was under the coalition of Yavin. This was a coalition of the king of Hatzor. He couldn't walk through here. So what he did, he had to walk where the waters are, so either in this section, where the springs are, but it's under the control of King Yavin, or via Jezreel Valley, through Beit Shan, all the way through the Jordan Valley and Jordan River. If we look at the layout of the land, let me go and make it like this. All righty. That makes more sense. Okay, you see this? Joshua is walking underneath the nose of the people of Hatzor. Hatzor is right here. This is Chatzor on the high grounds. And Joshua and the army are walking along the meanders of the Jordan River to face them to the showdown, which will be taken up on Chula Valley. So this is the way that they walked. And then at the end of it, you'll see how, let's just do it a little bit faster. Whoops. I'm sorry. The Google Earth just died on me. Okay, better. Regain control. Okay. So they're walking via the Jordan Valley all the way to Chula Valley, right over here. So this is what they saw. This is what I want to show you. Look at this. They're basically closed between the mountains. This is Mount Hermon, right over here. This is Naphtali. Okay, all this chain of mountains. This is Naphtali. Here is Chatzor. All of this, imagine, all of this section right over here is full of soldiers of King Yavin. Joshua is in a complete disposition. He comes from the valley and enters into, from the Jordan Valley and enters into the great swamp over here. We can understand why Joshua is so afraid. When we read Joshua 11, we see that Joshua is afraid, and God basically tells Joshua, don't worry, I am with you. And for you to show to everybody the might of who I am, you will destroy the king of Chatzor, and you will burn down the city, and you will castrate the horses. That part I never understood why, but I'm not disobeying the Bible. That's what the Bible says. So when Joshua destroys the king of Chatzor and their coalition, he burns down Chatzor to the ground. This, what I love about this, you can actually see the tub right here. This is the tub where the battle took place. Now, here is what we call in the military, we call it a triangle of destruction, meaning two people will walk into this tub, two nations will walk into this tub, one will go out. Okay? We need to remember that when Joshua comes in, yes, he defeated the small nations in the south. He has his armies of Israel, but he's facing an empire. The Bible clearly said Chatzor was the head of all kingdoms. And when Joshua defeats the king of Chatzor and burns it to the ground, no one messes with Joshua anymore. And then he can retire safely back to the city of Shechem and to be buried over there at the age of 110, not before he distributed the land. Okay? Just for us to understand, again, this is Hula Valley, right over here. This is what Joshua saw when he walked in. And let me turn the camera. Right here, you see this hill? This is Hatzor. Okay? So the battle took place at the valley. After that, Joshua went up, destroyed the city, burned it to the ground, and the rest is history. Okay. Questions, folks? Anyone?
Omer?
Yeah.
I have two questions. I put one in the chat. In chapter 10, it references the book of Joshua. What is that?
Chapter 10. Hold on. Let me read my Bible. Let's see what it says in Hebrew.
Chapter 10, 13.
Chapter 10, 13. So I will see exactly what you're talking about. Exodus. Joshua 10. Which verse?
13.
13. Oh, this is the battle of that he commanded the moon and the sun. That's what you're referring to?
No, it says it is not written in the book of Joshua with a question mark. What is that?
Book of Yashar is actually there were historical books that were documenting military campaigns or administration of leadership. For example, we hear many times at the end of, let's say, Book of Kings, it says, and the rest of his acts are written in the book of the great kings of Judea, or the great kings of Israel. So Book of Yashar was probably a codex of books describing an event. We don't have those books, but when the book of Joshua was written, they knew about those books. It's kind of like
Oh.
today you're going to talk about, the Constitution. Constitution, we have that, we know that. But in 1,000 years, some archaeologists will say, "Oh, they're talking about some kind of constitution. We don't know what it is."
We don't know what it is.
Okay, got
Okay,
it.
Second
And I
question.
had a second question. I'm hearing an echo.
Guys, if you can all shut down your mic, just apart from Kelly.
My second question is in chapter 11,
Yeah.
verse 8, where it says, "Then Adonai gave them into the hand of Israel." So when it says he gave them into the hand of when he gave them, does that mean that the angels were warring along with the actual humans?
No, when the Bible says in Hebrew, it says Vaitnam Adonai beyad. Okay, so it means that God put them in their hands. It doesn't mean that the angels were the one who were fighting. It means that God put the faith or the destiny of those people who lost into the hands of the Israelites to decide what they wanted to do with them. By the way, the Bible used the same sentence and the same description, not just when Israel wins, also when the Philistines, when they say God gave the Israelites into the hands of the Philistines.
Are there any times that the angels are warring with humans?
There's one, we don't know, the only time we know about an angel fighting against a human will be the angel of God fighting against Jacob and then rename him Israel. That's the only time we hear about an angel actually fighting, like literally fighting. I would say that the closest maybe will be with the Battle of the Amorites with Joshua, that stones fell down from the heavens. Maybe that will be the closest. But an actual physical struggle of angels will be only in the book of Genesis.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions? None, really?
I have a question.
Marty, please.
When it says that Joshua gave the lands to Israel, is Israel the name for Jacob?
It's an interesting question. Yes, Israel is the name that was given to the children of Jacob. It's not the kingdom of Israel, not to be mistaken.
Right.
There's the kingdom of Israel, which will be much, much, much later. The name Israel actually appears in external biblical sources in ancient a stela called the Mar Neftach stela, which is dated around the time of the Exodus, where the Egyptian king, is bragging about the fact that he destroyed Israel, which is basically a version of fake news of the 13th century BCE. So he didn't destroy the Israelites, because if he did, I wouldn't be here giving this lecture today. So the name Israel refers to the Hebrews. Later on, that name will become Jews, and after this the split of the kingdoms will be Jews and Israelites.
So the translation used Israel. He really gave it to the Hebrews, to the family of Jacob that became the 12 tribes.
Exactly right. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Bill, I see you have your hand.
I don't know how to word this, and I'm not sure that it's really a question, but I just recently was reading the book of Joshua, and I think about the Lord or God giving Israel the promised land, but Israel had to go in and kill people by the thousands. At what point did they not go, we fought for this land? I mean, it's an interesting concept. Would we do that today? At what point would we go to another country and kill thousands under the direction of God? We don't have that, I guess, because it's not the promised land. I don't know. It's just a concept that I just had to set the Bible down for a moment and walk away from it. Not walk away, but just kind of absorb it.
Well, there's two ways.
I mean, they were
Go ahead.
killing women and children.
Yes, there were, and there's also two ways to describe a war in the time of Joshua. There is, I didn't speak about this, and thank you that you reminded me. There is to conquer the land, and there is to inherit the land. It's not the same thing. Conquering the land meaning they came, they conquer, but they did not put inhabitants into the land. For example, the city of Jerusalem was conquered by Joshua. We just read it. But later on, we see King David fighting against the same city. Why? Because the children of Israel did not inherit the land, meaning they didn't kill all women and children. They conquered the land, they took the possession, and they kept on going. This is conquering the land. The other one will be to inherit the land. Inherit the land, such as, for example, the city of Hebron. When the Israelites with Joshua destroyed the defenses of Hebron, they inherit Hebron. And then in many cases, they did kill women and children, but in most cases, the Bible is very clear about this. When the Bible commands to kill the people, they kill the people, like Hatzor. The Bible didn't command them to kill the people of Hebron. And what happened was that a lot, and this is an assumption, a lot of the local Canaanites who dwelled in Hebron basically said, hey, if it works for the Gibeonites, it will work for us. And many of them basically joined the Israelites later on to become Israelites. So it's like it's happening throughout history all the time. I do agree with you that the concept of going in and destroying a nation completely is something that today for us in the Western world, it's something that we cannot grasp and we cannot understand. But this is only in the Western world. If you go and see what happened in China, what happened in Africa, their views is a little bit different than ours. But again, it depends on the timing and understanding of the role of God. If I'm going to use a Western period of time that they went and killed everybody in the name of God, that would be the Crusades. They did that in the name of God, of our God, of the same God of mercy. It depends who is the leader at that period of time that persuade the people. That's why it's so dangerous. I hope I answered the question.
Mayor?
Yep.
Yeah, I add something onto that. I saw a military history program about Joshua, and it said a couple reasons why he, as directed, destroyed conquered. Is number one, he was a force on the move, and he could not afford for him to be attacked from behind as he continued to move on. And the other thing is part of God's direction that they should not intermarry with the people. And so that was, easily interpretable with one of the reasons for that type of military tactic.
Mm-hmm. But I gotta say, when we continue to read, we see that there was a lot of mixed marriages. Ruth and Naomi, for example, she was a Moabite. So there's a lot of all the time. Humans are humans. It's funny, that when you look today in, for example, Lebanon, you will see a lot of Arabs blonde with blue eyes. So the joke is that the Crusades left a little bit more than just ruined churches in the Middle East. Sorry. True. Other questions?
Omer, I have two more.
Please.
So in chapter 5,
Yeah.
verse 13,
5:13, yes.
It says, now it came to pass when Joshua was near Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, there was a man. So it means that it's in a form of a man standing in front of him with a sword drawn in his hand. And then Joshua approached him and asked him, are you either for us or against us? And the man replied, neither. And then he says, rather, I've come as the commander of Adonai's army. So who is that man?
The man is probably a vision. When you read in the Hebrew scripture, it says, Ani sar tzva Adonai, ata bati v'yipol asher al panav. I am the captain of the guards, or the commander of the armies of God. Okay, so sar tzva Adonai is meaning the commanders of the armies of God. That can be a vision. Can definitely be a vision. We hear that actually several times in the Bible. It's not the only time that God appears in the form of a military might. It's not necessarily an angel with the army behind him. It's more of a promise. The same promise that God gave to Joshua. He said, "You will not lose."
Okay. And then my second question is, was Joshua married?
Actually, there's a story. It's an ex-biblical reference by the Jewish wise men of about 1,500 years ago. It's ex-biblical. It's kind of like our apocrypha. They say that Joshua married Rahab. There is nothing in scriptures about this. It's pure tradition, but that's a tradition that he married Rahab from Jericho.
Wow. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That's all I have.
All right. Other question, folks? All right. So if there are no more questions, as always, thank you so much for joining in. I know it's a sunny Saturday for everybody, but it's always fun to learn about Conquest of Joshua. If you have any certain topics that you want me to talk about, we're going to try to do it every 2 weeks until this pandemic will be away from us. And we will be able to go and really see the places, not just do it by Zoom. So if you have any topic that you want me to try to analyze and to talk about, by the way, Old Testament, New Testament, it's the same Bible. Please send me an email about it or write down on Facebook, and I will try to build something for and try to answer your questions. All right. So thank you so much. Shalom. God bless. And I'll see you in the next lecture.
Thank you, Amir.
Bye-bye. Thank you.